After all, a mother who isn't related by blood is just a fake, so you should just keep quiet and dedicate yourself to being a housekeeper for my adorable son and grandchild. Since marrying a man with a child, my mother-in-law had been criticizing everything I did. A year into the marriage, she started berating me for being a failure of a woman because I hadn't had a baby even after a year. In the process of venting her dissatisfaction towards me, she exclaimed that she couldn't see how a woman who has never given birth could have maternal instincts. She screamed that we had no need for a fake mother and told me to leave. Then, my husband, who was indifferent to home and the child, showed up and said we had no use for a woman who couldn't get along with his mother and told me to leave. I felt like my heart was being torn to shreds, enduring it desperately. However, my daughter, whom I thought I had formed a bond with through love despite not being related by blood, remained silent. Her silence meant that she shared the same sentiments as my mother-in-law and husband, so I decided to leave. Later, I received a distressing plea from my mother-in-law and rushed over, only to find that the room I once lived in had turned into a hoarder's paradise. I'm Mary, I work as a nurse. I decided to become a nurse not because I wanted to save lives, but simply because I thought that having a profession would be essential for survival in the future. I believed that there would always be a demand for nurses. However, through the process of studying to become a nurse and sharing both good and bad times with my peers, I began to take pride and confidence in my profession. When I turned 30, my family told me, "Isn't it about time you got married?" and set me up on several dates. But when weighing my career against marriage, I could never quite lean towards marriage. Despite this, in my mid-30s, I grew close to a doctor working at the same hospital. A year later, after his relentless pursuit, I accepted his proposal. There was a reason I didn't immediately accept his proposal. He had a daughter still in elementary school and a history of divorce. The divorce history wasn't a big deal to me. I was a first-timer with no experience in child rearing, wondering if I could really become the mother of an elementary school daughter. That was the reason. Because I am a nurse, entrusted with people's lives, I didn't want to make a vague decision to marry thinking I could somehow manage. I'm not shy because of my job, and I'm confident I can get along with children. But just getting along temporarily isn't enough. We have to live together, and if one of us has to endure, it'll eventually become unsustainable. I wasn't sure if I could love a child who wasn't related by blood. Amidst all my uncertainties, I was asked to meet his daughter, so I did. His daughter was very shy and seemed to be afraid of me the entire time. At that point, I too refused his proposal. But he didn't give up. "If things don't go well with my daughter, I'll step in and mediate. I'll make sure you never have to struggle. I can't imagine marrying anyone but you." This reminded me of something my mom used to say, that it's happier to marry someone who desires you. She was proposed to by my dad several times until she finally gave in, but she was cherished and happy, or so I was made to listen to her bragging. They say being desired is the best, and with that flow, I accepted his proposal, and our life together with his child began at his home. I felt that the reason his daughter didn't warm up to me wasn't just her shyness. Objectively, she also behaved somewhat distantly towards her real father, my husband. Knowing it was unrealistic for her to think of me as her mother suddenly, I wondered if we could start off as friends despite the age difference and made an effort not to behave too motherly. Whether it was the right decision or the fact that I spent more time with her than my husband did, we started to close the gap, and she slowly began to look me in the eyes and converse. When our eyes met, she still seemed a bit nervous, but I could tell she was trying to break out of her shell. I decided to patiently wait for her to take that step. After we got married, my husband remained busy with work, and his time at home was limited. Nights were just for coming home to sleep, and in the mornings, he would change into nice clothes and leave for work without even having breakfast properly. He wouldn't even say hi to his daughter, and it seemed like that had become the norm, with her not speaking to him either. Being new to everything, I wanted to discuss things like my daughter's school with him, but he would just leave it to me and end the conversation. Before I knew it, all household and parenting duties were dumped on me, and there was zero honeymoon vibe. I understood what it meant to marry a man with a child from a previous relationship, even though it was my first marriage. Still, I thought we could have some couples time after the child went to bed and maybe enjoy a bit of a newlywed atmosphere on weekends. I knew about his busy schedule before we got married, but I had assumed he would make an effort since he courted me so passionately. That's why, even though I understood, deep down I felt, this isn't what I signed up for. Since everything about marriage was new to me, I felt it was impossible to juggle work and resigned, hoping to adapt to my new family as soon as possible and return to work. However, realizing my husband had little to no interest in home or parenting and left everything to me, I figured returning to work might be difficult until my daughter was grown. But once I've decided to do something, I need to do it thoroughly. That's just who I am. For my daughter's sake, I took the initiative to participate in the school's meeting and other gatherings, which were new to me. At first, I was confused and felt like a burden to everyone, but being able to interact smoothly with anyone is my strength. Somehow, I managed not to be shunned by those around me. Then one day, I was called in by my daughter's teacher because there was something she wanted to discuss. Boys might be called in for being mischievous, but being called in for a girl filled me with anxiety. I wondered if it was because I was a stepmom that something was said about us. I had been careful not to let my actions negatively affect my daughter's standing, and as I reviewed my behavior, worrying about what I might have done wrong, I went to hear what the teacher had to say without finding an answer. My daughter might have done something wrong. I thought it may be my fault, but the teacher said, "Your daughter hasn't done anything wrong. It's just that she seems to be excluded from her group of friends." What? Isn't that a serious issue? Is it because of the stepmom thing? So, if possible, could you subtly ask your daughter about it? It seems she's quite fond of you. Me? It turns out my daughter had been happily talking about having a new mom in places I wasn't aware of. The teacher thought that if I asked, my daughter might open up about the situation. That night, my husband had to work an overnight shift unexpectedly and said he'd be back around noon the next day. With plenty of time on our hands, I had a long talk with my daughter. The reason for her exclusion was indeed related to me being her stepmom and her real dad getting remarried. Playing family with a mom who's not related by blood is creepy, someone had said, triggering the exclusion. She was told that someone who doesn't live with their real families should belong to a different group. These days, having a single parent or step-parents is not uncommon, but it seems groups still form based on family situations. I remembered from my own childhood how unconscious group mentalities could form based on family environments. Back in my day, being an only child meant you were considered spoiled, and groups formed with that unconscious bias. Being spoiled has nothing to do with whether or not you have siblings. Often, disparities based on family environments stem from something parents say offhand that children interpret and act on their own. Realizing this wasn't something I could solve alone, I reached out to a well-connected mom I got to know through school events. So what? Believe it or not, my family is also a blend of remarriages with no blood relation between my children. Furthermore, she scolded the rumor-loving moms, questioning what kind of parent discusses family matters not openly shared by the person themselves, especially in places where children can hear. She emphasized the importance of knowing what's appropriate to discuss in front of children, handing out criticism generously. Some people who were scolded by her ended up strictly reprimanding their own children. Thanks to her, the issue was resolved before it escalated. Later on, she called me aside to share her story. It turns out, she remarried when her children were just in preschool. Back then, she faced a lot of prejudice, with nasty comments about how unclean it was for unrelated boys and girls to live under one roof. Her battles against prejudiced moms not only protected her children but also secured her position. This incident strengthened my relationship with her and deepened the bond with my daughter. A year into the marriage, however, my relationship with my husband remained unchanged. He was a workaholic with little time at home, leading to days without any conversation between us. Despite knowing our situation, my mother-in-law frequently called, pestering about when she'll have a grandchild. I first met my mother-in-law when I decided to marry her son and went to his family home to introduce myself. Right from the start, she was blunt, sparing no hesitation in expressing her thoughts, making snide remarks about my appearance and the fact that I was single past my 30s, making me worry about the future. But my husband maintained that since we weren't going to live with his mother, it wasn't something to worry about, not taking it seriously. Still, I tried to see the silver lining that at least we weren't living with my mother-in-law and somehow endured the first year. But as the year was about to end, my mother-in-law showed up at our house unannounced. "How long are you going to make me wait for a grandchild? Hurry up and give birth to a boy, you useless woman. Do you understand?" She complained, "This is why I hate women who marry late. I always thought a woman unmarried past her 30s must have some issues. I was labeled a failure as a wife. If only my husband and I could have a proper marital relationship, there might be a chance for pregnancy." Right after marriage, he was enthusiastic about our conjugal life, but soon he complained it interfered with his work, and we ended up sleeping in separate rooms. With days passing without even a conversation, I wondered how I was supposed to get pregnant, almost wishing I could ask my mother-in-law for advice. "You've never shown any maternal instincts before. How could you possibly be a good mother to my grandchild? The role of a grandchild's mother is too much for you. After all, you're just a fake mom. A fake mother should just leave." Then my husband came home. No matter how busy he was, he'd rush home if his mother called, yet whenever I mentioned needing to talk about our daughter, he'd use work as an excuse, never once listening to my requests. I was disappointed, thinking, he just follows his mother's orders? What a mama's boy. When I found out that my daughter was being excluded because of our family structure, I had hoped we could discuss and confront prejudices together, showing that family isn't just about blood relations. But my husband was disinterested, leaving all parenting to me. Yet, he was also a party to our inability to conceive. I harbored a faint hope that he would explain our situation to his mother, given his minimal time at home due to work. "Just so you know, I never intended to have children with you." "What?" "Because you're just a woman I gave the title of wife to in exchange for housekeeping services." He wanted a housekeeper without the expense. Remarrying seemed the quickest solution, but the issue was his daughter. He searched among nurses for someone young, child-friendly, and capable of getting along with anyone. After facing lukewarm reactions due to the presence of his child, he desperately pursued me, thinking he wouldn't find anyone else willing to meet his daughter. He figured if he played the part of a partner just at the beginning, I wouldn't leave. He was content thinking I was getting along well with his daughter, only to explode when I couldn't get along with his mother. "I provided you with a place to live and made sure you didn't lack money. You've been living quite the luxurious life, haven't you? You should at least do that much in return." Because I couldn't get along with my mother-in-law, she said I was no longer needed and should leave. Luxuries? I'm not even aware of indulging in any. I've never made personal purchases with my husband's money since we got married. The flashy clothes from my single days have been put away, and I bought modest clothes befitting a mother, but those were bought with my own savings from before marriage. I never begged my husband for anything expensive. "Do you have any idea how much I invested in courting you? Pay me back right now and I might consider keeping you as a wife." I was left speechless. Could such treatment even be possible? The uncertainty and loneliness I felt starting out in childcare were overwhelming. How much I've endured that loneliness. I'm not asking for gratitude. But a little understanding of my position wouldn't hurt. As I began to question why I was even here, arguing back against my husband's words started to seem ridiculous. Then, my daughter, who had been out playing with friends, came home. The heavy, indescribable atmosphere seemed to affect her too, as she froze in place, remaining silent. "All right. As a stepmom, my place isn't here," I said, deciding to leave, and looked at my daughter. She had smiled when she said, "I know," after I told her not to be late when she left to play after coming home from school and putting down her backpack. There was no smile on her face now. Instead, she averted her gaze from me. "I thought our bond has deepened, and she would say something about me leaving, but it seems that was just my wishful thinking. I was completely isolated here. No one was on my side. I hadn't anticipated this, leaving me feeling downhearted. But expecting anything in a place where I had no allies was just empty. I decided to pack my bags and leave the house. After leaving, I stayed in a hotel. Although I have savings from before I was married, I can't live in a hotel forever. I considered renting a condo, but wondered if it was okay to do so when my divorce from my husband wasn't officially decided yet. Despite knowing that my relationship with my husband couldn't be mended, I couldn't bring myself to take steps towards divorce, mainly because I was worried about my daughter. The fact that she didn't say anything when I left made me question if our good relationship was just my imagination. I knew it, yet I couldn't move on because the many smiles my daughter showed me didn't seem like an act. 13 days had passed since I left the house. And there was not a single call from my husband. Considering the financial aspect, I thought about moving from the hotel to a rental that was available for short-term lease. Then one day, I got a call from my mother-in-law. I couldn't imagine her apologizing, so I thought she was urging me to sign the divorce papers quickly. Feeling that postponing it wasn't good, I answered the call, ready to face whatever was coming, but it wasn't about the divorce. "My granddaughter hasn't come home." I braced myself to be blamed for taking her, but instead of accusing me, my mother-in-law seemed genuinely worried, asking if I knew any places she might go or new friends she might have. Thinking it would be quicker to check places I knew she might go, I told my mother-in-law to wait at home. I headed to the nearby park first, thinking she might be at the supermarket we often shopped at or the park where she frequently played with her friends. I had taught my daughter that the supermarket wasn't a playground, so I didn't think she'd go there unless it was for shopping. By the time I arrived, it was already dark, and the park was quiet. Among the silence, there was a girl sitting on a bench. It was the daughter I was looking for. "What are you doing here? Your grandma was really worried, you know?" When I spoke to her, she looked up at me, surprised. I crouched down to be at her level and asked what happened. "I told Grandma I wanted to see you, and she got really angry with a scary face. She said she wouldn't allow me to see you. I was locked in my room with the door locked from the outside." She was shocked by the treatment but told me she wouldn't say she wanted to see me again, and then she was let out of her room. But she couldn't suppress her desire to see me, said she was going out to play with friends, left the house, didn't know where to find me, and decided to wait in the park, believing I would come for her eventually. She had started calling me Mom. The realization that the person she desperately wanted to see was me almost brought me to tears with surprise and joy. "So, you tried to come to see me? Thank you. But, you know, we shouldn't trouble Grandma. I'll fight alongside you next time. Let's go back home for today, okay?" My daughter is not one to upset adults normally. That she acted against her grandmother's wishes meant something must have happened. I took her hand and walked her back to the house we lived in until 13 days ago. When we arrived, my usually absent due to work husband was home, having prioritized his mother's request over work after receiving her call. Since I left, the household chores and parenting that I had been doing fell to my mother-in-law. Whether she was bad at housework or just refused to do any while being quick to criticize others, the house was a mess with trash scattered around in just 13 days. The kitchen was overrun with unwashed dishes, and clothes were strewn all over the floors and sofa. All belonging to my husband. "Don't cause trouble for Grandma. If Dad doesn't work, you can't live. But Grandma's cooking isn't good. It's too salty. I want to eat something Mom makes." My mother-in-law's face turned red with anger. "You brainwashed my granddaughter," she accused me, refusing to admit her inadequacy and trying to blame me. But my daughter's revelations exposed the truth. "Mom's not bad. Grandma and Dad don't do anything. Before Mom came, Auntie did everything. Grandma and Dad neither do anything." Between my husband's divorce and our remarriage, he and my daughter had stayed with his parents for a while. My husband was originally a man with no life skills, raised by his mother who told him that a man is a respectable adult if he works outside and earns money. That mother-in-law of mine was a terrible housewife who couldn't do any chores. While I think it's wrong to assume women should naturally be good at housework, she had a lot to say about the chores I did. Considering all her comments, you'd think she was good at it, but that wasn't the case. My husband's sister, seeing the situation, had been coming to their house to take care of the three of them, but she had her own life and couldn't keep it up. So, my husband looked for a housekeeper who would do the chores for free. To him, a wife naturally fit that role. I scolded our daughter earlier, but to be honest, eating my mother's cooking is like a punishment. I didn't realize how good your cooking was until I lost it. Please, let's put the past behind us and start over. Why he thinks he can say let's put the past behind us is beyond me. Shouldn't I be the one to say that? Even if that were correct, I wouldn't have the courage to say such a thing. I'm happy to be needed by my daughter, and getting back together would allow me to watch her grow, but who knows how long his repentance will last. I firmly told him that reconciliation was impossible. As my husband persisted, utterly exasperating me, my father-in-law came to take my mother-in-law back. What is this mess? You said you were going to take care of my son and granddaughter, so you couldn't look after me for a while? Is this what you call taking care of them? An unsanitary environment is not good for a young child. My mother-in-law and husband were stunned, unable to understand why my father-in-law was there. In truth, after being kicked out of the house by my husband and mother-in-law 13 days ago, I couldn't stop thinking about my daughter. Even if she hated me, I loved her. So, I confided everything to my father-in-law. Even though I often doubted whether my actions were wrong, talking to him made my worries seem silly. I convinced myself it's better to do something than to regret not doing it, so I would report to my father-in-law and share information whenever something happened. That's why, when I received a call from my mother-in-law saying my daughter hadn't come home, I couldn't dismiss the possibility she might have gone to her grandparents' house and contacted my father-in-law. Even if she didn't go there was a chance she would reach out to my father-in-law. Since he also started looking for her, I reported back to him when I found my daughter. It's always for my son and granddaughter, you said, leaving the house, but I knew you were just going off to bully Mary. That's not true. I truly thought of my son and granddaughter. But Mary was just too incompetent. You turned this place nearly into a garbage dump. You can't even pick up and throw away a piece of trash, yet you criticize my son's wife? What kind of nerve do you have to do such an embarrassing thing? It seems my father-in-law was often away for work. So he didn't realize his wife was incapable of, or rather, wouldn't do any housework. Essentially, during the time my father-in-law was actively working, my husband's sister had been taking care of all the household duties. My father-in-law said it was okay not to be able to do household chores. However, criticizing someone for something you can't do yourself was outrageous to him, and he declared a late-life divorce on the spot. Having lived off my father-in-law's earnings and done as she pleased, my mother-in-law changed her tune completely. With no real work experience and incapable of even tidying up, she knew she couldn't survive on her own now. Wait, darling. It was all my fault. I'll change my ways and devote myself to you from now on, so please don't talk about divorce now. Grandma, you're apologizing to the wrong person. Grandpa is mad because you bullied Mom, right? Why can't you understand that? My daughter added it. Neither Dad, Mom, nor Grandma ever listened to me. Only you listened to me, helped me when I needed it, and always put me first. You're the best mom. My daughter gave me words of high praise. I hate Grandma for speaking badly of my precious mom. My teacher said apologizing for doing something wrong is the right thing to do during my classes. Can't Grandma do the right thing? Chastened by being told she was disliked by her granddaughter, my mother-in-law begrudgingly apologized for telling me to leave, among other things. Although there were many more things I wished she would apologize for, expecting more after so long felt unrealistic, so I didn't push for it. With the help of my father-in-law, my divorce from my husband was officially finalized. Having felt nursing was my calling, I returned to work as a nurse. Though at a different hospital than my ex-husband. My father-in-law had negotiated with my mother-in-law, saying he would consider not divorcing her if she could adhere to certain conditions. He confronted her about her spending habits and decided from now on she would get no allowance and would only shop with him as a present. They agreed she would stick to a set budget for necessary household items. My ex-husband and his daughter had to sell their house and move back to the family home. However, they agreed that household chores would be outsourced to a housekeeping service, paid for out of my ex-husband's earnings. Despite being a high-earning and trustworthy doctor, my twice-divorced ex-husband is now viewed through a lens of personal failure, as I was informed by a former colleague. My remarriage with him being short-lived was seen as problematic, and my move to another hospital might have also contributed to a decline in how people perceived my character, according to a former colleague's analysis. I moved to an apartment near my new workplace. It was in the next city over from where I lived with my ex-husband and daughter. There, I had an unexpected reunion with my daughter's former teacher while shopping at a supermarket. He was still teaching my daughter and knew about my divorce. He told me that despite the changes in her home environment, my daughter was thriving at school. He praised me for raising her with so much love, even though I was her stepmom. After expressing admiration for my character, he jokingly asked if it was okay to court me now that I was single. I took it as a joke, considering it was too soon after my divorce, and we parted ways that day. However, it turned out we lived close by, and we frequently bumped into each other at the supermarket. With each encounter, our conversations grew longer, and we naturally exchanged contact information. The more we dated, the more comfortable I felt with him. Eventually, I found myself thinking that I might be open to remarrying, this time with him. Though my relationship with my ex-husband's daughter had technically ended, we continued our interactions as friends with a significant age difference. She told me how meals had become more enjoyable since a housekeeping service started coming. But she still occasionally wished for my omelet. Fulfilling that wish for her someday is something I look forward to.